Why, hello, I'm Pruitt, and Jim has joined me here today to read the tea leaves, cast the bones, and look at the entrails of the fatted calf. For you do not need to be an oracle to know that this is Divinations on WebDM. What is there to see in the Divination School?
I see a spell school that has a lot of promise, that is a fun school to play, but that has some spells in it that at the higher levels are difficult to make rulings for and sort of like incorporate into play. And of course, a lot of dungeon masters, they don't like a lot of divination spells. They can negate mysteries and things like that.
Yeah.
But then in the lower levels, there are a lot of divination spells that I kind of use a phrase to describe them as like a light switch. They are binary. You either have them or you don't, and if you have them, it completely bypasses certain challenge types, and if you don't, you're sort of like
Still in the dark.
stuck. Right. And so divination is this weird sort of school. The player's handbook version mentions divination spells as sort of revealing information, offering glimpses of the future, locations of hidden things. There's sort of an anti-illusion aspect to divination, as well as distant visions and extending your senses beyond their normal reach.
Yeah.
To that definition...
Both in space and time.
And both in space and time. And to that definition, I would add those spells that let you question an entity of some kind. There are a lot of spells that let you seek an answer from an extraplanar entity of some kind, as well as those spells that deal with like actual prophecy. You're talking to like a god or an oracle or something, and that's, I guess that's kind of the glimpses of the future. But to me, they're a bit of a different type. So lots of spells fall in these, right? Detect magic, detect thoughts, those reveal information, locate objects, locate creatures, sort of finding the locations of hidden things, anti-illusion, there's true sight, see invisibility, lots of different ways to kind of interact with the game world. And what I like about divination, before we get into all of the things that I've done, is that I like that it's a spell school devoted to uncovering secrets.
Yes.
And revealing hidden things. And as we've talked about very often on WebDM, that I see dungeon mastering in part as being the transfer of information about the world, about the scenario that's being played, to the players. I like to use techniques that let the players give me feedback about that and have a stake in the game for that. But in a more traditional game, the dungeon master has all the secrets, or most of the secrets,
right,
and they are dispensed one way towards the party, and a diviner is like a superhighway of that. There's so many different spells that they can uncover hidden information about the campaign world, about the past, about all these things. That means that if you're a dungeon master who likes to have a rich backstory to your world that you then use to inform the scenario that you're playing, then having a diviner means that you have an opportunity to reveal some of that backstory to your world, and tie things together more, and sort of create a richer, fuller, more multi-layered kind of setting.
It's for those DMs that really did all the backstory, they really got all, like every piece of everything has a whole history behind it. You got a diviner in your party, you're probably going to be a little bit happy.
Yeah, and they're going to be glad that there is information to uncover, right? Like that's the other thing with the diviner, is that, if there's not hidden things to uncover, if there's not opportunities for the diviner to learn something new, to gain information about their enemies, or to plan ahead, we're going to use these information gathering tools to kind of get an idea of what's immediately ahead of us, so we're prepared for it. Then you're just there for the ritual magic at first level and some neat abilities that you get like later on, instead of like fully embracing this idea of someone that like uses magic to learn and to gather information and to use that. Then knowledge is power, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. First level has a couple of good ones. A couple of these light switches you were talking about, right?
It does. It's got several that, particularly for the arcane casters there, some of the lower level magic, divination magic is like, if you have it, the encounter or challenge or whatever is nothing.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you're stuck. So an example of that would be comprehend languages. Comprehend languages is a ritual spell that lets you read languages as well as understand languages that are spoken to you. It doesn't impart any ability on you to communicate with them. But I'm thinking of scenarios in which, like, the ancient text or tome or whatever that's in an indecipherable language, bards and wizards and knowledge clerics and whatever have to travel to a different place to begin to learn a third language, which will help them then translate this. Then they need to seek out a Rosetta Stone type thing. And so there's all these quests that can surround an object that has mysterious information in it, that they can't quite unlock. And maybe that's once they get the tome. Maybe there was a whole adventure just to get it in the first place, right? Comprehend languages, it's that all of that potential for tension and revealing information and going to interesting locations and talking to NPCs, that potential for adventure is negated by a 10-minute ritual. And it's one of those things where getting to the end point in which you can read the ancient tome, you can decipher the long lost runes on the dungeon wall, you can understand the secret language of the magic sword that you have and understand it's the secret words or whatever. You want them to get there, or it will be fun when they get there, right? Yeah. It will be an interesting time once they've done that. But at the same time, like, having it be something that a 10-minute ritual can take care of means that you lose a lot of that. You lose a lot of this potential for adventure that's there. And that's why I see a lot of them that are like that. Comprehend languages, identify is one of those. In some cases, detect magic is something like that, where it's an absolute. You either have it or you don't, and if you have it, then none of these sorts of challenges are ever they're never really going to come up. And if you don't have it, then you can have something, you can incorporate those challenges, but at the same time, wouldn't it be neat to have a little magic that could help you out?
Yeah.
Something like that's like comprehend languages, but is not as absolute and all-encompassing as a comprehend languages, for instance.
Right. Another thing about divinations is, like you were saying, they can reach out and basically touch someone or an entity or whatever and learn some information.
Yeah.
Let's kind of go through those divinations, like the augury and divination, like that. Like, what do you like and what are your problems, if any? If any.
So, like, the thing with divinations is that they run into a very real and insurmountable problem in that the dungeon master is not omniscient. The dungeon master cannot predict the future. The dungeon master does not always know what their enemies are doing at any exact moment. They might. They should be thinking about what their enemies are doing when they're not engaged with the party. But, like, knowing exactly what they're doing when the party scries on them or uses a clairvoyance spell to scout ahead in a dungeon or something. That's the big thing that I can see, is that sometimes the players will seek out or have access to information that the dungeon master doesn't through these spells. Mm-hmm. So an example might be, the dungeon master hasn't really thought about what spell schools are prevalent in a particular magic effect. They just want the magic effect, and then the party casts detect magic on it, and now they're kind of like, I guess it's like this and like that. And usually when it's not thought out ahead of time, there's often some confusion there, or it's not information that is going to be immediately useful to the person detecting magic, as opposed to you've come up with a magic effect or an artifact, something, you've given it some thought. Well, what does necromantic magic look like in my world? How does it manifest to those detecting it? What information can I reveal once one of the casters comes in here and begins to sort of perceive the currents of magic and mm-hmm. what have you? You can start revealing information about that. Which if you hadn't thought ahead, then you might be caught off guard and you might not have the time needed to make sure it's useful information that you're imparting them after they've cast this spell. So it requires a bit of forethought and planning, which is what divination's about. But let's take augury, right? Second level cleric spell. Give me one of 4 possible outcomes about a course of action in the near future, right? Mm-hmm. Weal, woe, both, or none. It's one thing if you're like, I'm using this in a dungeon with clear avenues of advancement and the opportunities to sort of go outside that are limited unless the party leaves the dungeon. I can see in that case, you don't have too many variables you have to consider. You can just sort of think about, like, the party asks, if we continue on this line, will we suffer fortune or worse? You can sort of gauge that, but you can't predict how the dice are going to go. You can't predict which monster is going to pass their saves and which ones aren't. You can't predict, whether or not a player is going to have just a crap round of rolls and nothing happens. And, what should be a cakewalk turns into kind of a nail biter. In terms of like a combat encounter or getting past a challenge or a trap or something. And so like anything that asks the dungeon master to predict the future gets a hard pass from me in many ways. And that sucks, because there's a ton of spells in here. Like all the ones that let you contact another entity. Everything from divination to commune to contact other plane, commune with nature. Legend lore is sort of something like that. All of these are powerful spells.
Yeah.
And by the time the party gets up and is able to cast them, they have access to information and magic that could potentially alter your campaign and the way that it's going. If some crucial piece of information has been out of the party's grasp for a long time and they suddenly come upon a contact other plane or something, yeah, they got to pass an intelligence save to avoid going temporarily crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's not ideal.
Right.
At least it can be removed if you got a cleric on hand.
Sure, you can got a cleric on hand. You can have that removed. Putting them to bed for a day is just a trick.
Give them their sippy cup and a nap.
But then you get like 5 questions truthfully answered by a planar oracle or something like that.
Yeah, it's a big risk reward.
It's a big risk reward, and so the dungeon master needs to know. With me, if I have players that I know have access to these spells and they plan on casting them, my first thing is just like, if you're going to do it, let me know. Or be prepared for me to tell you, we'll have to resolve this thing later. Like, don't cast one of these spells if you hope to act on the information you want to learn immediately after casting it, right? You either need to give me time ahead of time to prepare for it, preferably with you telling me which questions you want asked. Or we cast the spell in-game and you ask your questions, then I will get back to you with the answers at an appropriate time. I might just say like, well, the spell just lets you ask the questions. The answers arrive in their own time. Right? That might be how I do that. You don't make demands of a god. You petition a god for something, and then when they decide they are ready, they will respond, usually with an angelic messenger or something.
Yeah, you left a message on their machine.
Right.
They'll get back to you when they can.
And this is part of my overall dissatisfaction with the magic system of 5th edition, really not just 5th edition to pick on them, but most editions of Dungeons & Dragons, is that the magic doesn't feel very magical. It's more like superpowers. And I like a type of magic that's more uncertain, that's more unpredictable, and that operates according to its own logic as opposed to sort of like any internal consistency. And to be perfectly frank, I don't know that I've ever found that in an RPG yet. So that, might just be the fact that we have to have systems that make sense to us as the players and dungeon masters, and that, mitigates some of the mystery that you could get out of a magic system.
Yeah, and then we have to kind of abstract it from there.
Right, you got to just find your balance. So, because a lot of these divination spells are on-off switches, the heavy use of divination magic can lead to a boring game. It's sort of like the opposite problem of we don't have enough information to make a decision.
Yeah.
There's too many secrets and we have no idea how to uncover any of them. This would be a case of like, well, we just cast a spell and uncover the secrets. Like, there's no risk, there's no whatever, there's no...
Yeah.
It's at that point, it's just like, well, let's just call the campaign. Let's just not do it.
Yeah, you scry on the big bad enough, his entire routine.
Right.
Like, we're going to hit him here, but,
Yeah.
The
old tactic of scry and fry, not so viable anymore. Even like a first level spell like Identify can make the game more just mundane. Consider the following scenario. Your party has uncovered a hoard of treasure from a dungeon or something, a long lost tomb or something like that. Several items in there, they are able to kind of just sort of take a look at and figure like, oh, this sword that we uncovered from the long lost tomb that has no rust on it, that's like immaculate and just a little bit of dust that we wiped off and looks brand new. Probably a magic sword. Is it still super sharp? Then it's probably a kind of magic sword, but maybe there's like jewelry and other things that the party knows is magical. They can sort of feel it. Maybe they detected it. And now they have to kind of figure out what they do. That either involves experimentation with the various items that they have, or visiting an NPC that can identify for them. This was the way older editions of D&D were played before the Identify spell, in which like if you uncovered a magic item, like you just have to use it till you figure out what it does, or you have to find someone in the game that can identify it.
Yeah.
And it created an adventure out of getting magic items that you're like, well, I don't know what these do. Now we have to experiment with them in the safest way possible. or we need to find someone, and that's a journey, and that's an adventure, and it's a chance for failure, and then you get there, and like they're not just going to do this for free. What do they want from you? And so all of these things build on each other to create a campaign. And if you have a single spell, or in the case of 5th edition, a short rest that lets you identify what the properties of a magic item are, then all of that potential for adventure is negated. It's one of those things that I waffle back and forth on. Sometimes I like to lean into the way that Dungeons & Dragons magic does negate challenges completely. And then there are other times when I sort of like get bored with it and want a game that has magic that's less absolute and less like it always works. This is true about a lot of magic, but to me, divinations are where it comes to the most to the fore, because a lot of this magic is magic that's done in downtime, or when there's not a lot of interesting things going on. It's like, oh, I cast this spell, here's what you find out. And it's an opportunity, if you want, to make a game out of that interaction and like bring in the sort of the role playing into it and the tension and all those other things.
What are some of your kind of high points of the divination school? What are the spells when you look at, you're just like, yeah, that screams divination to me, and I like how it interacts with the world?
I like legend lore as a top one. To me, legend lore is like it's like DM backstory unlocked. You achievement.
Yeah, you cast a spell that basically creates a documentary over that item. Ken Burns comes in.
Yes, you got your Ken Burns documentary for it. I like legend lore because of that, because it allows players access to that deep backstory that you might have prepared. In particular, if it's like stuff that they have, like magic items or artifacts or something that's of great significance to the campaign, it's an avenue for getting that information to the players. And to me, it's like, it sort of screams divination. You have this object and you study and establish a magical connection with its past. And I'm fuzzy right now on what the penalties are for 5th edition level lore, legend lore, but like in times past, if you cast it, it was disorienting and everything. There used to be a higher level version of it called Vision. It gave you all that information, but just instantaneously. Otherwise you'd be like knocked out or phased or stunned or something. Contact Other Plane is one. The image of a wizard in sort of like a summoning circle that focuses their magic, meditating, casting their consciousness out into the planes, seeking some sort of planar oracle or entity or something that they can petition for information, risk their psyche or their personality being changed or something like that. If I was going to change Contact Other Plane from 5th edition, I wouldn't have this saving throw to avoid insanity. It would be saving throw to avoid some sort of planar flaw. Like I would change their personality or give them a new flaw or ideal or something. Like maybe come up with a table of custom ones that relate just to this spell. So it's like casting your mind out into the cosmic void to whatever's out there answering back. An older version of the spell, you didn't get to pick. It was just whatever's out there that could answer back. And they might not know. It might not be in their sphere of expertise, or they might be lying to you.
Yeah, they might just go crazy just by talking to them.
Right. I've had a villain in a 3rd edition campaign who used a series of simulacra and Rary's telepathic bond. The simulacra were always casting Contact Other Plane from scrolls and then feeding that information back to the villain. And so it was things like, am I going to die this week? Am I going to die on Monday? Am I going to die on Tuesday? Am I going to die by magic? Am I going to die by a sword? Is it in the morning? And it's all yes or no spells. So you just start, because they're, in this case, I arranged it so they had unlimited castings. What's the movie, Minority Report, with like the 3 kids in the pool that do the...
Just constantly casting into the future.
And then relaying that information telepathically to the archmage.
Just imagine him going to like social events and like, should I talk to that person? Should I talk to that person?
Exactly.
Does that person bear ill will towards me?
Yeah, exactly. Although in this case, it wouldn't be the actual person that's there. It would be another simulacra that's in the state. The real wizard does not do anything that would directly harm them.
Never touches.
They are somewhere else. That was how I used it, kind of as a villain there. I don't know if that's like by the rules legit in 5th edition, but it's a fun way to kind of think about using those spells on a campaign scale.
Yeah. Do you think there's any way to make True Strike not really suck? I mean, it's like it's the spell. Like you look at it, and you're like, oh, that's cool, and then you really think about it, and you're like,
nah. I'd make it.
It's great for an aim action.
Yeah, I'd make it a bonus action, probably a bonus action spell. Although there might be people who are like, you would always take that or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, like it's fucking advantage. It's I suppose like having it on demand as a cantrip, a bonus action cantrip is is maybe extreme. Maybe you do it like the Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade, where it's like, as part of this spell, make an attack action. Make a ranged or melee attack, and with advantage. You know?
See, I like that better because even for a fighter who wants to take it, once they get 2 attacks,
It's not going to be worth it.
you're not going to be worth it. I mean, you got the 1 attack at advantage, or you have 2 attacks where you could crit both of them.
Right. Yeah, especially if it's like, say, a high elf fighter and they just have 1 cantrip or something like that.
Yeah.
And an Eldritch Knight is probably the only kind of archetype, maybe a Valor Bard, whichever one that gets to like cantrip and then an attack.
Yeah, I mean that's the Warcaster.
I can see that being maybe, but there's probably better uses if you're worried about like raw numbers or things like that. If it was a bonus action, that would be interesting. I don't know. Like if you made an attack as part of the casting of it, then I can see like every rogue trying to get a hold of True Strike.
Yeah.
Because they're only making that 1 attack anyway. It might as well be with disadvantage from the spell. So.
Right. But with Divination, it really is a tale of 2 cantrips because, like guidance,
That's guidance, right?
it's guidance. Like you do not. I mean, if you can take that, you probably should because that's a spell that you can use.
You just use whenever.
Day.
It's got concentration, so it's a spell that you don't want to just. You don't want to be careful when you cast it. But if you're a cleric, or I forget who all can take it, like clerics, bards, druids, maybe not bards.
Bards technically could.
Yeah, they could.
That's
true. If they really want it. It applies to skills. It's mostly used outside of combat, although you can use it for initiative rolls if you really want. In terms of a divination type spell, it points towards another use for divination magic that really only guidance is really the only one that's in like the main player's handbook. There's some DM's Guild products that really expand on that. Elminster's Guide to Divination is one of a series of products. The Elminster's Guide to Magic, and then they do, I guess, each of the schools. And it's got a cantrip there called Adept Skill, self-only, and it's like guidance, except every time your proficiency raises, the die type increases. So that it's just you, but 3 levels of proficiency, now rolling a d6 instead of a d4. 4 levels of proficiency, now I'm up to a d8. It goes all the way up to d12, so that you're adding an extra d12 to your rolls that you're already proficient in. If you're not proficient, it stays at d4. It's a spell that I really like, a cantrip that I really like for diviners, because otherwise wizards have this weird kind of, they're not the best at arcana. Right? Like, and that bothers me in 5th edition. It bothers me that wizards are not the best at arcana.
The fact that you can have like a rogue take it and then get expertise in it.
It gets under my skin. In the same way that like rangers are not necessarily the best at survival. Expertise as a skill has its benefits and drawbacks, but it is kind of one of those things where I sort of think every class should have a skill they have expertise in, whether it's like athletics for barbarians and fighters. But I really think it's like for wizards, it should be, arcana, the skill which governs the use of magic and the knowledge of magic kind of thing.
Yeah, they should know everything there is to know.
But Elminster's Guide to Magic, if you are looking for a more varied and diverse section of divination spells to sort of like fill out your diviner, you might check it out. It's got a lot of spells that like let you see into other planes, spells which deal with not just vision but also hearing and touch and taste, spells that let you sense through other people's senses, as well as a lot of other cool things.
Like ally sense instead of beast sense.
Ally sense instead of beast sense. It's got a spell that basically takes the diviner's portent ability and just gives it to anyone who can cast that spell. They only get one roll they can replace, but if you like that ability, it's there for you.
Yeah, it's one of the best.
It's pretty fun.
Seeing you and Huel is one of the reasons why I basically made a diviner in Warhammer. The Blue College, like having that ability, second port in Avamul, where I can have 2 rerolls in the next hour. But what I love about that is like I can just cast that all freaking day.
Right. Baby. Yeah. Bruce talking about his Warhammer character, which has a very different magic system than 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. But those are some of the things that I like about divination. There's other stuff. Commune with Nature is one that I like because it's like Swamp Thing, right? You're connecting with the green. brain, the parliament of trees.
Gotta eat some mushrooms off of his back and take a trip. And
Right. Telepathic Bond is a good spell if you've got a lot of table talk or you have a dungeon master who does not like table talk or cross talk or things like that. Well, we're all connected telepathically, so it doesn't matter. We just think. We communicate at the speed of thought with each other.
Or if you have a party, because I can't recall the exact range on it once you have it cast, but
Pretty sure it's planar.
it's planar. So
Pretty sure.
So a party that splits up a lot, or if you have
Party that
a
splits up a
rogue
lot,
that
yeah.
loves to scout ahead.
Right.
I mean, that kind of thing. Like once they're telepathically bonded, he's sneaking up there. He's like, oh, there's 5 guys. Get up here.
Get up here, yeah.
And there's no more like, all right, I go back to the party.
Right,
all right, I
right,
go
right.
back to the group.
Yeah.
Instead, it's like he sneaks forward. Okay, come up 50 feet.
Yeah.
Sneaks forward again. All right, come up 50 feet.
Come up 50 feet. Things like that are interesting. Any of the ones that let you extend your senses beyond a certain range, clairvoyance, scry, things like that, use of a crystal ball. Those require the dungeon master to have some idea of what their enemies might be doing when they're not directly engaged with the party. If it were me, I'd come up with a little D6 table that's just like, what are they doing right now? If I don't already know. And a lot of times I already know because it's a lot of what I do in my prep is just to think about what the villains are up to. You just roll a quick D6 table. This is what the enemies are doing. And that way you don't necessarily have to give it too much thought or worry too much about it. And you've got a little tool handy that lets you just like make a quick decision and move on from there.
A couple questions about the higher level divination spells. First off, what the hell happened after 6th level? Did anybody see that coming?
Right.
Then there's foresight.
Then there's foresight, 9th level spell, foresight.
Which is, if you have any kind of Gish character.
It's really good for a Gish type character. Yeah, it's 9th level, so it's a long way to get there.
It's a long way to get there, but if you ever do.
Yeah, it's one of the more non-concentration 8-hour, you have advantage on everything, disadvantage to attack you, can't be surprised. To me, it kind of feels weak for a 9th level spell, as useful as it is for those kinds of...
Well, that's why I said get, because for like any melee fighting type character, somebody's going to be in the shit, getting attacked a lot, doing a lot of attacks.
Yeah.
It really doesn't get any better than that.
I mean, you're really limited in foresight then to, I think, Blade Locks can get foresight. Blade Singer can get foresight. I'm not sure if foresight's on the sorcerer list. This would be something that a more dedicated and astute YouTuber would have prepared for. But you're dealing with like Blade Singers and Blade Locks, so we're not talking about like, these are sort of squishy characters to begin with, and I'm quite personally, I'm of the opinion that if you're in melee as a Blade Singer, you're doing something wrong. That you should be using your considerable defensive powers to just be a badass wizard, as opposed to swinging a mere sword. But it's available if you're the kind of Blade Singer who likes to swing a sword. So yeah, I like foresight. It's really a cool spell. I use it a lot of times. For just like enemies, is just like I want them to have like a neat buff or something like that. Then like they acquired foresight somehow.
Let's look into our crystal ball at the end of all things.
The end
and
of
how
all
how does that
things.
look with a diviner? Like we're talking like prophecies, omens. Like how does a DM use that?
Sort of like
effectively?
less in the realm of like specific spells for divination, and more just like the glimpsing of the future and the whatever. So I've seen a lot of different systems try this out, and some of them go the Dungeons and Dragons route and ask the DM to predict the future, and others of them go around of like, well, you've got whatever prophecy that you have. At any time the party is engaged in an activity that's related to that prophecy, maybe there's a bonus that comes with it, or a buff, or some kind of thing that ensures that it's more likely that the prophecy's outcome will come true than not. And a reverse example of this is Warhammer 2nd Edition has a thing called Dooms. It's an option that you roll up when you create your character that's like somewhere along the line before play, the player has a prophecy told of their death. And they're usually very elaborate. It's things like you will be killed by a trusted friend with a dagger or something like that. They're usually very specific and very elaborate. And so any time that the player is in a situation or a scenario or whatever where that might come true, they face severe penalties. To like they have their critical hits against them increased. They have a lot of bad things that can kind of happen to them if they are in a situation that aligns with their doom. And of course, dungeon masters can introduce prophecies and omens and portents and signs and all sorts of things into their game. I do like the sort of just hanging bonus that comes that sort of comes with a generic prophecy of some kind. Like you have your fortune read, and this is what you get, and this is where you find it. I think incorporating those things, incorporating oracles and prophets and seers and things like that is really fun in your games, and you can do a lot of things that are outside of the spell system with those NPCs. You're the dungeon master, so you can just say like, yeah, they don't work like a regular diviner. They work the way I want them to work. You now have something that's in the game that can be more mysterious, a bit more mystical, and deliver prophecies and the like to the players, and then when they do, the players can sort of figure those things out, see how they work. There's something in the game that would lock an outcome in place, right? That would say like, this thing is always going to happen. I try to stay away from things like that, and try to stay away from prophecies and omens that suggest a concrete outcome to something, because you cannot predict how things are going to go, and I do not want to sort of like manipulate events to ensure that a prophecy that I created comes true. You know, I don't want to do that in the game. So I will give prophecies that are vague, prophecies that don't relate to outcomes, but instead relate to like processes or troubles or things like that. And then by keeping them vague enough, the party's open to interpreting them. A lot of times the players will make the vagueness of the prophecy fit the events at the table anyway, and do a lot of the hard work for you.
Right,
just
right.
by, you know.
Well, it is fun whenever you get something like a Thor Ragnarok,
Right.
where they try to prevent something the entire time and realize, no, they're the ones that's supposed to be like enacting it.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
if it can work out like that, it is a lot of fun.
Maybe they got that. They're just fucking around.
It's just your freaking street performing monkey. Just clap and dance. It's time for puns.
Now make
a pun. I can't.
think of a pun.
Okay.
I find that I want to eat these dice because they look like Jolly Ranchers.
Oh yeah.
So I've never bought like just straight up one colored like this, but I want a set of Jolly Rancher dice that I can roll, and when they anger me, I will then, well, guess what?